What's up guys, Asian here again with another theory crafting video, and for today we're going to be discussing the various race and race DPS differences between both Magicka and Stamina DPS. This question kind of came to a head on a topic I read on the Elder Scrolls Online subreddit, where someone was very adamant that the whole idea that race doesn't matter is actually a myth, and that race does matter. And I'm just kind of here to kind of put numbers to the statement that race actually doesn't matter too much when it comes to DPS. Now, if you are one of the top 0.1% of players, if you're somebody in MC or aspiring to be at that level, then yes, race is going to matter, because the small differences in DPS might actually matter to you. If you are a true min-maxer, if you want to pull as much DPS as you can out of your toon, then yes, race is going to matter. But the numbers that I'm going to show you today kind of indicate that race, for the most part, doesn't really matter too much when it comes to DPS. So that's kind of where that question comes from. Somebody just posted on Reddit kind of ranting really that race matters a lot between DPS, and my argument has always been, yes it does, but only if you want to chase the number 1, number 2 spots on the Trials leaderboard every week. For the average casual ESO player, for most raiders, you're still capable of pulling Vet Trials DPS with a suboptimal race, and that's kind of what this video is going to prove today. So I did multiple tests across Magicka Sorcerer and a Stamina DK. Looking at the optimal race, or the meta race that most people recommend doing for people who want to go into endgame content. I've then picked the race that was optimal at some patch earlier, for example Khajiits or Dunmer, for just to kind of see, for people who are just getting back into the game after a year, after a couple months out, and they don't want to pay for a race change. But they were still endgame players 6 months, a year ago, and they want to know whether or not their race is going to make or break them. And then I did another kind of suboptimal race that wasn't exactly the best race, but still had racial bonuses that benefited their specific class. So Magicka for Magicka DPS, and Stamina for Stamina DPS. And then finally I picked one race that had absolutely no racial passives that would benefit you at all. So a Stamina based race for a Magicka Sorcerer, and conversely a Magicka based race for a Stamina character. So I did 4 parses, or I did 4 races, 5 parses each, 5 on the Magsorc, so I have 20 on the Magsorc, 20 on the Stamina DK, and I'm going to show you guys just kind of what the numbers look like right now. So we're going to hop over now to our spreadsheet here. So this is all the parses that I've done. I did 40 parses, 8 different races, 5 parses across each, and these are our numbers. These are our averages, these are the standard deviations, and so you can see here, let's start off with the Magicka Sorcerer. So I started with a Bosmer. Bosmer's racial passive is just stamina regen, max stamina, and stealthiness. So clearly none of those are going to affect your Magicka Sorcerer, because none of them are related to Magicka at all. And we can see here our Bosmer pulled a very respectable 32.5k as your average. Then we swapped over to the Altmer, widely regarded as the best race choice for a Sorc because of that extra shock damage on the racial passives. They also get Magicka regen and 10% max Magicka. So obviously Altmer are very, very gifted when it comes to the magical arts, both in the lore and in the game. So Altmer is a clear choice for Mag Sorcs, or any Magicka class really, except for the exception of being Mag DKs. So we can see here our Altmer pulled about 34.7k. And so we did the same thing with Dunmer. Dunmer have 9% extra Magicka, and they do have additional elemental bonuses to their racial passives, 7% Flame, 2% Shock, 2% Frost. So they're not quite as good for Magicka Sorcs. They're very, very powerful for Magicka DKs, but not so much as Sorcs. You can see here we still pulled 33.6k. And finally we chose a class that had passives that increase their magical potential. So for this case, we chose a Breton. Bretons get 3% reduction to all Magicka abilities, and they get 10% extra Magicka. So they don't get any damage boost to any of the elements, but instead they do get some Magicka reduction, and they still get max Magicka. So Bretons are kind of one of those races that are magically inclined, but not necessarily something that you would recommend for a min-maxer. And we can see the Breton pulled 33.2k. So now looking at the percentage differences between the two of them, we're going to take a look at the Bosmer versus the Altmer. The Altmer pulled the highest and the Bosmer pulled the lowest. That is to be expected. But what exactly is the difference? So we're going to go ahead and quickly figure out what the percentage difference is. Oops. Divided by this, multiply by that. And we can see the Altmer pulled 6.4% higher DPS compared to the Bosmer. So yes, there is a significant difference between the Bosmer and the Altmer. However, this difference doesn't really matter for most endgame content. You can see here with a Bosmer, you still manage to pull an average of 32.5k. That is plenty of DPS. This is a solo parse, keep in mind, so you're not getting all the buffs you're going to get, you're not getting all the penetration on the dummy, because this is a raid optimized setup parses, so I'm not using the lever, I'm not dumping points into spell erosion. This is my raid CP. I'm using the apprentice, I'm using only 30, I think I'm using 38 into spell erosion instead of dumping like 60 points into spell erosion or something like that. And I'm only getting major fracture, or major breach I should say, from Ellie Drain. So 6.4% might seem large, but in the grand scheme of things, in the overall endgame content, unless you're doing something like Vihoff hard mode or Maw hard mode, things like that, you can still, I mean even then, you can still pull raid level DPS that you need to meet those DPS checks on a stamina toon on a Magicka Sorc. So ultimately, yes, there is a difference. If you're a min-maxer, then yes, you're going to want to have the extra 2k DPS on an Altmer compared to a Bosmer. But if you just want to clear, you know, the vet crag trials, you're not looking into necessarily doing all the hard mode trials. You're not looking into doing, you know, VHOF hard mode. You're not going for the top leaderboard scores. Then it doesn't really matter. 6% is a lot, but it's not going to make it so you can't clear all the content in the game. So that's it for Magicka, and it's the same thing for stamina. See, so the Altmer on a stamina DK, we pulled 36.4, Red Guards pulled 37.4, Bosmer pulled 36.9, and Khajiit pulled the highest at 37.8. So if we do the percentage difference between the highest and the lowest again, oops. Here, our Altmer pulled the lowest, to be expected, and our Khajiit pulled the highest. We only see about a 4% difference between the Altmer and the Khajiit for the stamina DK. That is still not really going to make or break you in the endgame content. Yes, it is a difference. You know, 4% is not a 0% difference, obviously, but an Altmer is pulling 36.4k on a stamina DK. Obviously, that's meeting most of the DPS checks, if not all the DPS checks in the game, except for perhaps the hardest content, like VHOF hard mode. And again, this is a raid optimized CP. I only have 19 points into piercing. I'm using the Warrior Mundus. I'm using Sunderflame. I'm not using Twice Fang Snake. I'm not using Spriggans or anything like that. I'm just using Sunderflame and VO. Not using Crags, anything like that. So in a real raid scenario, these parses are obviously going to be a lot higher. I'm not getting any off-balance uptime. I'm not getting any additional buff. I'm not getting minor berserk. So, you know, even on an Altmer, you're still able to pull. I'd wager, if I were to race change to an Altmer on my Stam DK right now, I would be willing to bet I can pull above 40k on a raid parse. And that's just the reality of it. Race, yes, if you're a min-maxer, if you want to pull out the absolute most DPS out of your character, then yes, race does matter. 4% and 6% are not 0. However, for 99.9% of the players in ESO, race does not matter. These numbers show that on a suboptimal race, on a race, you're playing a Stam DK on a Magicka toon, you can still pull vet trials level DPS. You know, the thread on Reddit was saying that, oh, you know, I was paired with an Argonian Stamplar or something like that, like a Magicka race on a stamina DPS, and we didn't clear the dungeon by like 50k health, and he was saying, oh, if he was a Khajiit, we would have cleared it. And yeah, maybe that's true, because you know you will be pulling higher DPS, but there are so many things that go into being a successful player, into being a successful DPS, that you can't just say, oh, if you were a Khajiit, you would have been able to clear the content. There's a lot of things going on. Did you play the mechanics correctly? Did you do your rotation right? Was there lag spikes? You know, did the healer heal you through a dot? Did the tank lose aggro? You know, did you forget to do a mechanic? You know, were there ads out that the tank weren't aware of? You know, were you standing in red? There's a lot of factors that go into your DPS parse, and you can't pin down a low parse just due to a race or anything like that. You know, for example, sometimes on my stam DK, I'm a Dunmer, so the closest race here would probably be Bosmer here, so I'm pulling 37k on a solo dummy parse, and occasionally I'll drop down to 34 because I miss a couple of bow weaves on my back bar, or I get a lag spike and I end up, you know, going slideshow, and you know I don't know where I am on my rotation, so I have to completely reset my rotation, and that just messes up, you know, my parse. But you know, that's just kind of the variability that happens with DPS parses, and it's not because I'm a Dunmer that I'm not able to pull, you know, consistently high DPS. There's just sometimes I'm standing stupid and I die. Sometimes you know, there's a mechanic that, you know, I'm aware of and I'm trying to avoid, but somebody else, like Saint Lothus in VAS, you know, with the Defiling Blast, sometimes, you know, somebody doesn't realize it's on them and they move around and I get hit by it. You know, that's not something that I can control, and that negatively impacts my parse. You know, so you can't pin down being a good DPS just due to a single factor like a race. There's a lot of things that go into DPS, and ultimately, like I said, for 99.9% of the ESO player base, race doesn't matter. You can still pull that Trials level DPS on a suboptimal race. And if you do want to be a min-maxer, then yeah, go ahead, make an Altmer max work. But if you want, you know, if you're a role player and you still want to do endgame content, but you know, you want to role play as a Breton for some reason, or you want to role play as an Argonian, but you still want to be a Magsork, you know, so you can do endgame trials, then go ahead, do it. You know, no group is going to kick you out for being an Argonian Magsork. As long as you can pull the numbers, that's the only thing that most trials groups care about. You know, so race doesn't matter. Play what you want. It's far more important to know how to play your race. You know, what's your rotation, what's the fight mechanics, things like that. Race is just one small, very small aspect to the whole endgame, how you play the endgame. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found this informative, and I hope I finally put the nail in the coffin concerning the whole race debate. So that's it. I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.